Today was supposed to be the day that a controversial immigration policy ended, but on Friday, a federal judge in Louisiana blocked the Biden administration from ending Title 42.
It is a public health provision that allows Customs and Border Protection to reject migrants at the border on the basis of trying to prevent the spread of COVID-19. In early April, the CDC said the policy was no longer needed because of current COVID conditions, vaccines, and treatments.
Now, we've heard about this because of the pandemic, but where did Title 42 come from, and what's been its real impact on the border? Here's this week's KSAT Explains.
It started at the height of the pandemic, March of 2020, when the Trump administration enacted Title 42. But it's actually been on the books in America for nearly 80 years. It's part of the Public Health Service Act signed by FDR in 1944, toward the end of World War II. The intent of Title 42 was to suspend entries and imports from designated places to prevent the spread of communicable diseases. Tuberculosis was a big public health concern then. The Public Health Service Act also created the National Cancer Institute, but overall, not legislation that was considered major.
It really had rarely been used and had never ever been used in the immigration context.
Until 2020, that's when Title 42 was invoked to essentially suspend immigration at U.S. land borders. It meant that Customs and Border Protection did not have to process people who presented themselves at the border wanting to seek asylum. Instead, they're fingerprinted and expelled from the U.S. That's not the same as deportation. When someone is deported, they're barred from re-entering the country for a certain number of years. Expulsion doesn't carry that penalty. What happens after someone is expelled depends on where they're from.
If they're from Mexico or Central America, they're typically just sent right back to Mexico within a matter of hours. If they're from another country where Mexican immigration is not going to allow them to simply be put back, then they're temporarily held in CBP custody. There were people who were being held in hotels until essentially a plane is filled up and then people are flown out.
That's what we saw play out in Del Rio in September 2021. Nearly 16,000 migrants from Haiti crossed into the U.S. hoping to seek asylum, fleeing a country in upheaval after the assassination of the Haitian president and a devastating earthquake. It became a humanitarian crisis in Del Rio. Thousands of people living in makeshift shelters under a bridge with few supplies and resources. It's exactly what the mayor of Laredo is concerned about with the ending of Title 42.
Currently, as we speak, there's over 3,000 Haitians in Nuevo Laredo, our sister city. Obviously, that's going to take a long time, and I don't know whether these folks will get frustrated like they did in Del Rio and would want to come all at once.
Mayor Pete Sine says Customs and Border Protection needs more resources to handle an increase in migrants. CBP plans to add 600 agents to the border as Title 42 ends. Homeland Security will also increase the capacity of federal holding centers from 12,000 to 18,000 and vaccinate those in federal custody. But a big question surrounding preparations for the end of Title 42, will it all be enough? In March of this year, the Border Patrol facility in Eagle Pass was at capacity, so CBP announced it would begin releasing migrants into Dimmitt County who'd been processed and cleared through background checks.
Could be 10, could be 50, could be 150.
Title 42 was still in effect then, allowing migrants to automatically be turned away at the border. So why was an immigrant detention facility so full? In part, Erica Schomer says, because the use of Title 42 has been inconsistent.
Some of them are detained, some of them are released. And so that is also a concern because it appears to be very arbitrary who is rejected and who is allowed to make a claim.
To make an asylum claim, you must be physically present in the U.S. You can't start the process online or even at a U.S. embassy. Once a migrant claims asylum, the next step is what's called a credible fear interview. That's when an asylum officer decides whether a person merits going through the full asylum process. Fear is something Jamie Solis is fleeing. Arelicia Barrera met Jamie and her 3-year-old daughter at the Catholic Charities Respite Center in McAllen. They came to the U.S. from Nicaragua to escape political oppression and violence.
Y ahí es terrible, ahí está bien reprimido, no puedes decir nada porque ya te echan la policía. No puedes expresarte bien, tenés que andar siempre con ese miedo.
She was one of the lucky ones who wasn't turned away. And then there's Yamari Gonzalez Vasquez from Cuba. What he fears, he says, is hunger in his home country.
Si estamos pidiendo asilo para tener un mejor futuro, para un futuro para el bebé, para nosotros mismos también, que tenga todo lo que un cubano no puede tener.
That is all that we've been advocating for, right? Allow people to apply for asylum. It doesn't mean they get to stay. It just means give them a chance to apply, and if they qualify, they get to stay. If they don't qualify, they may be deported. And Title 42 gets rid of all of that.
But there are those who enter the U.S. illegally who don't seek asylum, whether frustrated with too slow a process at the southern border or simply hoping to evade immigration authorities.
I do find people that are lost, okay?
Richard Guetta owns La Anacua Ranch in Starr County, outside Roma, several thousand acres just north of the border. He's seen firsthand what migrants often go through trying to make the dangerous journey into the U.S.
They have been abandoned. Whoever brought them across abandoned them. And they told them, well, it's just a short distance and you're going to be in Houston, right? But of course, that's not true. It's so hard to see people enduring things like that, you know.
His fences have been damaged by migrants who cross his lands. Even his livelihood, his cattle, have been affected. But a concern that spreads beyond his ranch, he says, is drug smuggling.
You know, there's a lot of narcotics coming across. The National Guard is out there to supplement the Border Patrol. And even so, they can't control it. So it's out of hand. By removing Title 42, you're going to add to an existing burden.
Yet some argue the anticipated wave of migrants is a problem that U.S. policy created.
Because of Title 42, that's the reason why we have the levels and activities that we see right now.
The numbers are arguably higher right now precisely because we've been pushing people back for more than 2 years.
Let's look at the numbers from Customs and Border Protection for fiscal year 2022 so far. That's October 1st, 2021 to May 17th of this year. CBP has rejected people 1.2 million times at the southern border. More than half of those rejections were Title 42 expulsions. But these stats reflect the number of times a person has tried to cross the border, not the number of people, because the same person can try more than once. It can be confusing and complicated, much like the American immigration system itself. Despite calls again and again for reform, substantial change continues to be a struggle. For now, we'll see what a change in Title 42 brings to Texas.
I think that it is going to be very chaotic depending on what decisions are issued by which courts regarding what policies.
Now, to watch any episode of KSAT Explains, just scan this QR code you see here. That will take you straight to ksat.com/explains, where you can watch those shows on demand. Look for a new episode next week, right here at 6:30.